Hey, you guys, and welcome to the Odinic School of Mysteries. This is Bear. Thank you for coming. So I actually didn't really expect to be recording today at all. Hence the reason I'm doing this with the audio rather than setting everything up. My family stepped out for a little bit to go do. I guess they're going to a farmer's market or something, and I don't usually go to those things because they trigger the hell out of my migraines. So I'm here instead. So I just kind of took the opportunity to jump on here and just kind of ramble for a while. I hope you don't mind if I just ramble. Um, it's kind of, I like doing that sometimes. When things get a little scripted, then I don't always feel as comfortable. I like to just kind of relax and just talk about stuff sometimes. One of the things that we do in the mystery schools, and I've talked about this a number of times, is called the reconciliation of the paradoxes. It's one of those. It's basically where you take two things that seem to be opposite in nature, good and evil, for example, or like last week we used the examples of the gun debate. All guns or no guns. Whenever we find something like that appear to be opposites in nature and separated by degrees, it's almost always, without exception, at least no exceptions that I have so far found, it's almost always an effect generated by a cause of some sort. We're looking at two poles of one causation. And that could be kind of, it's really useful when you're trying to solve problems. You look at this and saying, okay, am I fighting to fix a cause here, or is this actually an effect that I'm fighting? Because if you went over last week, you can't really do anything with effects. They're already created. They're already manifest in creation. There really isn't anything per se you can do to really fix them, which is why you can only affect change in the land of causations, which is mental. You have to affect the mental side in order to fix the physical side. You can't try and fix the physical side because the physical side is already created. You can't uncreate it. So that's called the law of manifestation. The law of manifestation. It's one of those laws that is a little bit hard to kind of wrap your mind around at the beginning, because it's just so different than the way we usually tend to think of things. We usually tend to think of things as there's a problem in the physical world. I could go and just tackle the problem and it's fine. But you don't really solve anything, right? So going back to the example I think we used in the last episode and maybe a few episodes ago, when we're talking about gun violence, for example, I mean, you could take all the guns away, but you still are left with the problem of violence. So you haven't really solved anything. You haven't really solved the violence problem. You've just forced someone to go and create bombs instead. That's kind of the thing with laws and stuff. They're useful only up to a point, and at that point you can't legislate your way out of consciousness. And I know some people don't want to hear that. Unfortunately, there's no real way around it. So the real question is, if we have two things of opposite natures and they're separated by degree, it means that they're being created by one thing. One thing. So when we look at good and evil, right? when we look at good and evil, you have two things of opposite natures separated by degree. So that means good and evil are generated by a single thing, one thing. And so the object of the exercise is to figure out what is the cause of this. What is the generating factor? I was listening to Alan Watts the other day, and those of you who are kind of in this philosophy space are probably already aware of him. He was one of the first people to really bring Eastern philosophy to the Western world. He was probably one of the very first full-blown Western gurus before Eastern philosophy became really popular here. He was one of the first people to bring it over and to study it in a real way, rather than just having it be a curiosity. One of the things he was, an illustration he made on this point, which I thought was actually a really good way of illustrating it, was explaining that the inside of a box and the outside of the box are still part of the same box. The two parts, they look different, right? So if you're like a bug, for example, and you're inside the box, the inside is going to look quite a bit different from the outside, because your perception is so close to the surface that it's you can't see the whole picture. But for those of us who are outside, who are bigger than the box, we could see the whole picture, and we would know right away that they're both the same thing. But a tiny insect, let's say like an ant, for example, who wakes up one day and finds himself inside a box, it's not really the case, though, is it? It looks quite a bit different in there than it does on the outside. But it's all still one thing. So when we come to the question of good and evil, again, though it sounds ridiculous on the surface, it is possible for both good and evil to be generated through the same phenomena. And so really what we need to do, actually we kind of need to define our terms, because what one person would define as evil, another person would probably define as good, depending on your motivation. So, like we covered fairly recently, all evil ultimately is theft. And all theft ultimately is a dissonant tone. It's a musical note that doesn't ring in a pleasant way. It's jarring and uncomfortable to be a part of something like that, to listen to something like that. Which is why when you hear someone playing a piano that's out of tune, it's horrible on a visceral level, and you can't even explain why. There's just something about it that just kind of rubs you wrong. I'm drinking my coffee. So when we talk about evil, beyond just talking about action, we're talking about tones. And we're talking about thefts. We're also, talking about just the negative things that happen to us in our lives. One of the things I found really interesting about this, when reading the Emerald Tablets of Thoth, one of the things that he explains in there, which I think is a really unique way of looking at it, that the guy who is in charge of darkness, the guy who, I think his name is number 3, actually. There's these, they're called the Seven Lords, and they sit in the place called Amente. And the halls of Amente are kind of this underworld, I guess you could say. This place where these different gods they live and they dwell, and their whole purpose on Earth, the whole purpose is to help mankind. But of course, this, like all esoteric documents, this is written in symbols. And so the exoteric reading would say that these guys, they live in the earth itself. The esoteric reading of it is it's an analogy for the mind and the body of man. And so you have these 7 lords that dwell in these halls, the dark hidden passageways in the earth, in the skull, in the mind. And one of these beings that are there, that are here specifically to help man, is a guy whose job is to direct negative energies towards the individual. And that's a really interesting way of thinking, of looking at it. And that's, so you have to ask the question, how is it possible for something bad, like we could say that the devil, for example, is objectively evil? On the surface, we say that. We say, because that's common knowledge, right, that the devil is an evil guy. So sticking with the same principle, right, we have this guy in the halls of Amente, in the Emerald Tablets of Thoth, who generates evil and generates darkness and generates chaos and generates negative energy and puts it in the path of man on purpose to trip him up. We read the Gnostic texts, and if you ever had the chance to read the Gospel of Judas, and I'm not trying to say you have to agree with the Gnostics on this, but it's an interesting point to think about. It's at least worth considering. In that particular gospel, Gnostic gospel, and this will, you'll find out pretty quickly why the Christians didn't really like the Gnostics very much and why they considered them so heretical. The Gospel of Judas, Jesus not only knew what Judas was going to do, he tells Judas to do it. And there's this long conversation between Jesus and Judas, and going over the whole plan and why it was necessary for Judas to do what he did. So, and we can even, like my friend Jacob Israel, a lot of you are aware of him, in his channel. He always talks about how the shepherd needs a sheepdog, this thing that nips at your heels. So to solve this riddle, it's almost as if that evil is specifically put here to help us to grow. It's not, I understand that this sounds bizarre, but it is almost as if evil is a force for good. I understand how that sounds. I get it. And I know it's a mind twist. I understand that. I know that it's bizarre. I understand. It's almost as if evil is a force for good and put here for our benefit. There's a thing known in the mysteries called the sacred gift of struggle. Struggle gives you, we talked about this in the episode about the frost giants. There is a very specific and interesting creative component that comes out of chaos. And that's true. Chaos breeds creation. And so we look at, like if we look through mythology, and we look at these different gods, we'll notice that in almost every instance, the chaos god is always the god of commerce, artists, and other creative endeavors. Nearly always. And that's specifically because out of chaos, out of struggle, is born new things. New things come out of struggle and out of strife. And that's really, in my opinion, that's really the way we need to look at things such as the devil and things such as evil in general. If we approach it as God is picking on me and being mean to me, and life is hard, and why is life being so hard to me? You know, life isn't fair, it should be easy. We're missing the point. I think we need to change our paradigm a little bit and realize that maybe, just maybe, life is specifically and purposely built to be difficult. And I know that's not really a comfort, but it, in a way, at least I can speak for myself here, in a way, it changes the paradigm. When you realize that every problem you come across in your life, every road bump, is really ultimately about a job interview. It's the universe trying to say, okay, let's test the mettle of so-and-so. Let's test the mettle. Let's see if this person could overcome this challenge. Let's see if despite being put under these hard circumstances, will this person still do the right thing? Will this person still decide to grow? Or will this person collapse under their own weight? And that's one of the things I've been pondering this quite a bit lately, and particularly about Saturn. So Saturn is where we get the word Satan from, and Satan is where we get the word Satan from. Satan, Satan, Saturn. Santa Claus is also comes out of the god Saturn. Saturn is the Roman god that is equivalent to the god Chaos. Chaos, Kronos, and Saturn, they're all the same god, basically. They're all essentially the same being. Saturn is known as the Lord of the Rings. Saturn is also associated with a lot of eye symbology. And that really confuses people, because a lot of these symbols represent a lot of things at the same time. It doesn't represent, like the all-seeing eye, it doesn't represent just one thing. It represents a bunch of things. If you see a horned eye, that is almost always Saturnian in nature. Saturnalia was the original high festival for Saturn. It took place around Christmas time. And Saturn was the god of self-indulgence. He was the god of drinking heavily, sexual indiscretion. You know, he's the god of wealth and money and all this stuff. Which is why, and you know, if you put a gun to my head, I can't expressly prove this, but it's my opinion, at least, that Saturn is the god that a lot of these prosperity preachers actually pray to. These guys who are more than willing to take the money of poor people to fill their own pockets. So Saturn is this god that you're pretty much taught to hate. You're taught from the beginning that the devil, that Satan, is this evil entity. And that might actually be true, right? That actually might be true. However, I think that if we are thinking people and we think through this problem and we don't look at it, we don't take it for face value, but we actually analyze what is actually happening here, I think it becomes clear pretty quickly that all those things that are designed to be distracting for us, all those things that are designed to be put in our way to keep us from growing, that base consciousness, those things that the body wants and desires. The body wants to have sex with everything that moves. Right? That's something that the body wants to do. The body wants to have pleasure at any... Excuse me. I apologize. The body wants to have pleasure in any way, shape, or form that it could possibly get its hand on. The body wants to minimize suffering and expedite pleasure. The body is the thing that has the ego and that wants to be worshipped. And so, when we're dealing with like religions like the Church of Satan, Temple of Set, Temple of Satan, we're dealing with ego worship, the worship of self. And when we're doing that, really what we're doing is we're worshiping the body. And one of the things, going back to the Gnostics, another one of the things that I think are really fascinating, and again, you don't have to believe this per se, but it's, again, just because you're presented with contrary information doesn't mean there isn't truth in there somewhere. So it is worth at least pondering. As my teacher told me when I first joined the mysteries, he says, can you entertain an idea without accepting it? And that's basically what I'm asking you to do. Can you ponder an idea without accepting it? So going back to the Gnostics, one of the things that the Gnostics believed is that Yaldabaoth, or Saturn, was directly responsible for the creation of mankind. That the creator of all things, he created man. And then the Yaldabaoth, seeing that, created his own version in response. And so, again, I'm not saying you should take it as a literal truth, but I'm saying that there is certainly something to that, I think. That that there's something about our condition here that lends itself to indulge in the same things that the maker of the body likes to indulge in. Right? We're created in the image of our makers. And so it's easy. It's easy to do a lot of these things. It's easy to walk down that path. It's easy to give in to uncontrolled sex with anyone indiscriminately. To the point of self-harm. It's easy to want to take from other people for your own personal profit into their harm. Those kind of things are really easy to do. It's really easy to justify things. And that's because, for better or for worse, I think there is a part of us that has to contend every day with this force, with Saturn. And I think without people realizing it, that Saturn is the god, for better or for worse, that we come in contact with more often than any other spiritual being. It's the ground we walk upon, basically. I'm not saying that in a literal way, but I'm saying that low frequency, the base frequency, the underlying frequency of everything is what we swim in. And it takes a tremendous amount of self-effort to climb your way out of that. And I think that's the specific job for Satan, Saturn, Kronos to do. I think that is what its job is to make it difficult for someone to climb. So that way, because it takes so much work, because it's so difficult, because of all these things, it is it makes us stronger and more equipped individuals. And ultimately, that's really what we want, right? Ultimately, what we want is to be strong and equipped individuals. So when we do get gnosis, when we do climb our way out, when we do the work that is necessary to get to where we need to go, we've earned the right to be there. Right. To be an enlightened being, we've earned the right to be there because we had to claw our way out of this thing that is specifically put there to keep us down. And that's basically the unification of this particular paradox that we started off discussing. Is how is it possible to have good and evil both be the same thing? How is it possible that evil, that something objectively evil, can be a force for good? And actually, I'm not trying to put... So here's the tricky part. So I don't want to, because I don't know enough, I don't want to make any statements of fact here. But it is, I suppose, it is entirely possible that Saturn is actually a good guy. Maybe. So the question is he a good guy who's just doing a job? Or is he a bad guy who's being used to do a job? So either way, however you want to look at it, I suppose that the outcome really ultimately is the same. The outcome is struggle, struggle, struggle. And because you struggled, you get to be the butterfly at the end. You get to be wrapped in the cocoon and all squished in there, and life gets tight and uncomfortable, and you're being pressed. And you, after months of fight and metamorphosis, you emerge a divine being, rather than nothing more than a what's the word I'm thinking of? An intelligent animal. And in society in aggregate, that's really all society in aggregate really is just intelligent animals. We do all the same shit. We still kill each other over resources. Right? We still kill each other and fight each other over territory. We get in really stupid arguments about stupid things, and we allow those stupid things to tear everyone apart. And that's because we're still, in aggregate, everyone is still under that Saturnian vibrational tonality. Does that make sense? So that is the kind of work we do. We take a problem like that where you have two things that are opposite natures, and we say, how is it possible that these two things are unified? That these two things are actually one and the same thing? On the surface, it's difficult to see how something that is bad, right, is actually good for us. On the surface, it's difficult to see why a child getting cancer is a good thing, right? It's on the surface, it's hard to see why war and famine and pestilence and bad things happening to good people, why all of that happens, and why it could actually be good. And this is kind of brings me to my next and final point, because I don't want to draw this out for too long. I don't know when my family's going to get back. But the way the ancients saw things is they were long-sighted in the way that they viewed life. We see life and the things that happen in our lifetimes as the beginning and end all of our growth. Right? We see we still have it in our minds that we only live for at best 75 to 80 years, and then we die, and that's all we get. Right? And then we're judged based on that, and then we either get to go to heaven or go to hell. And we still have this very Western, Christianized, Judeo-Christianized mindset when it comes to those things. But the ancients didn't see that. They saw the story of us taking place over lifetimes, hundreds of lifetimes if need be. So I said, like a child getting cancer or something like that. And the way the ancients would see that is they would see this as not a child, but a spirit. And like all of us, the spirit comes here specifically to learn certain lessons. You almost have to take sounds callous, but you almost have to take the fact that it's a child out of it and see it as an individual spirit who has to learn and is stuck and is interred in a child's body who gets cancer. Right. And so the way we have to look at this stuff is that we come here to learn very specific lessons, to have bad stuff happen to us. We come here specifically to have bad stuff happen to us. We come here specifically to do certain jobs. And we fulfill the things we need to fulfill while we're here as best we can. And if we didn't learn our lessons, we have to come back. If something random happens and we die, we come back. It is, I can't remember where in the Bible it was, so forgive me. But, Jesus said, it's the Father's will that none shall perish. That ultimately, everyone's going to get to where they're going. It might take several million years, but ultimately, everyone's going to get to where they're going. And answering that paradox is the first step into understanding, I believe, or at least one of the first steps into understanding why we're here, what are we doing, and why. The sacred gift of struggle, my friends, is a really important thing. It cannot be understated. You get to leave Earth with something you did not possess when you came. Your experience here gives you something you never would have gotten otherwise. Chaos doesn't mean destruction. It means creation through struggle. I'll say that again. Chaos does not mean destruction. It means creation through struggle. And so, when bad stuff happens and you come up against it and it's fighting you like crazy, just remember that it's a job interview. It's a teaching opportunity. The universe is trying to see how you approach the problem, if you learn anything from it. Will you make the right choices under bad circumstances? Because if you are able to do that, maybe you get to leave. Maybe next time you come back, if you have to come back, maybe you get to be rich and not have to struggle so much. I don't know. I don't know all the answers, but it's certainly worth thinking about. It's certainly worth asking the question, is it possible for something that is objectively evil to actually be a force for good? Is it possible that the very thing we think is this evil creature is actually here specifically to help us grow? It's just a question. And these are the kind of questions that help us come to the truth of things. I'm not saying, I want to make it perfectly clear, I'm not saying you should worship the devil. I'm not saying that he's actually a good guy. I'm just putting the question out there for your consideration. They're called what if questions. And that's a very good what if question. What if the devil was told to be here and it's performing a job specific to our benefit? And it's just something we're thinking about. All right, you guys, I think I'm gonna finish my coffee here, and I'm gonna let you go. I appreciate you hanging out and listening to me. It really means a lot that you're willing to do that. And I hope you have a really good day. I really do. I want you to have a good day. I want you to think a lot. I want you to ask good questions. And please, please subscribe if you haven't already. Check out our website and all that good stuff. Okay, folks. I love you. Bye-bye.